Hello, subscribers and guests of my channel. In this video you will find out what was waiting for Soviet military women who were captured by the German Nazis. The German soldiers didn't care if a woman was standing in front of them or a child. Men were at least of some use, but women were nothing but a 5-minute pleasure, and then you could shoot them without incurring punishment.
She was hit in the face. And fine, let everyone see. Healthy German officers beat a prisoner, beat a woman, wounded, barely standing on her shot legs. Then she was forced to go to the car. Every step caused fainting pain. She screamed, and instead of tears, large drops of sweat rolled down her face.
This is an excerpt from the documentary story of the Soviet writer Daniil Granin Claudia Vilor, which was published in 1976, clearly showing how the Germans treated captured military women. The book describes in detail how a 35-year-old woman was captured after a hard battle with Wehrmacht soldiers. Then in 1976 it was nonsense, since such a topic was taboo. Too much cruelty was contained in the memories of women who had been in German captivity. Too much fear and sorrow were endured by the few who survived. Do not think that the fate of Claudia Vilor is an exception. A lot has already been said about the terrible fate of men tortured in Nazi camps, but they rarely talked and wrote about girls and women, trying to avoid unpleasant details. But there were many female servicemen on the fronts of the Second World War: snipers, nurses, pilots, signalers, and anti-aircraft gunners. Until now, we don't know much about what the Germans did to female servicemen when they were captured by them. Despite the fact that Germany was a signatory to the Geneva Convention on Prisoners of War, its provisions were not respected on the Eastern Front. According to the plans of the Third Reich, the Slavs were subject to almost universal extermination, so there was no point in taking care of prisoners of war. There was even an unspoken order according to which women in military uniforms were equated with partisans and were subject to immediate execution. All based on considerations of practicality. Men in the concentration camp could be used for heavy work, and women as a rule quickly died from overwork. During the Second World War, about 1 million women served in the Soviet army. 80,000 of them had officer ranks. The Third Reich did not recognize the female sex as full-fledged soldiers, putting them on a par with the partisans, who were forest bandits for the Nazis. There was simply no official order from the leadership of the Third Reich on how to deal with female servicemen. If there was one, it was destroyed. But in the archives of the 4th Nazi Army, which was part of the Center Group, there is a paper signed by Field Marshal General Gunther von Kluge with his own comment that women in military uniform are to be shot, not captured. It can be assumed that similar orders at the level of individual units existed in other formations of the Wehrmacht. It is difficult to say how many Soviet women died in this way in the first years of the war. Until 1944, the cases when they were captured and sent to concentration camps were an exception. Everything ended much sooner. Tens of thousands of girls from the Soviet Union fell on the battlefields, becoming victims of reprisals by the Nazis. Many girls suffered before their death. They were tortured and bullied. According to the testimonies of servicemen in the Soviet Army, who during the offensive in December 1941 found many female corpses near Moscow. These women were soldiers and were held captive by the Germans. Most of them were bullied. The writer-reenactor Oleg Kazarinov in the book Unknown Faces of War quotes excerpts from the notes of German soldiers. Here is one of them.
"We were clearing the camp of suspicious people. There was a beautiful woman among the prisoners. Karl and I took her to the operating room. She was biting and crying. After 40 minutes, she was shot. There are only a few minutes of pleasure left in my memory."
And here is an excerpt from a letter written by a German officer to his frontline commander.
"I'm all scratched and bitten, now I'm doing it easier. A gun at the head, it cools the ardor. Recently, a Russian girl killed an officer with a grenade. Now we strip them first and search them."
The same book contains a quote from an archival document. It will not be possible to show you the quote verbatim, but the bottom line is that there is a village of Akhimovka near the city of Melitopol, where the Nazis stopped a car in which two seriously wounded Soviet soldiers and a nurse girl were traveling. The Germans grabbed the girl and dragged her into the field. After being bullied, she was shot. And in Svetlana Alexievich's book The War Has Not a Woman's Face in 1983, Svetlana wrote about a female officer who said that she saw the body of a young nurse with gray hair who was tortured by the Nazis. Death on the battlefield was not the worst end for female servicemen from the USSR. It was much more terrible to be in a concentration camp. Here is one of such testimonies about the fate of a prisoner who was a major in the Soviet army. She was brought to the Stutthof concentration camp in 1944 and was constantly bullied. They forced her to take off her clothes, took pictures, and laughed at her helplessness. One day she couldn't stand it and spat in the face of the tormentor. The massacre immediately followed. The woman was shoved into the crematorium oven. Massacres were commonplace in concentration camps, but there were also cases when SS officers were amazed at the fearlessness of Soviet women and stopped bullying. So in 1943, in the Ravensbrück concentration camp, captured nurses and doctors began to refuse to follow the orders of the Germans. They refused to sew uniforms for the Nazis, saying that forced labor of the military, according to the Geneva Convention, is prohibited. Then the women were left hungry, driven to the campsite and forced to march without outerwear in the cold wind, but the women began to sing in chorus. Then other prisoners ran out of the barracks and began to applaud the marchers. The commandant of the concentration camp, who arrived at the scene of the riot, stopped the punishment and ordered everyone to return to their places, and then sent them to other jobs, no longer forcing them to sew German uniforms. There was only one specialized concentration camp for women in Germany, Ravensbrück. Over 130,000 women passed through it during the war years. At the same time, 92,000 women died from exhaustion, diseases, and bullying. Women Soviet servicemen also came here, in particular, a group of nurses and signalers who participated in the battles for the Crimea is known. They were taken to a concentration camp in February 1943 and kept in a separate unit, separated from the rest. It had more difficult conditions for survival. Probably, the conditions of detention in Ravensbrück were better than in general concentration camps. But this did not apply to female servicemen. Humiliation awaited them everywhere, and death awaited many. They died not only from hunger, backbreaking work, and cold walls. Often they had to endure bullying at the hands of the guards from the SS retinue. I have already made videos about many wardens. You will find them on my channel. Only at the end of the war, in the autumn of 1944, when the Germans already felt their imminent defeat, a special decree was issued for the German security service that women prisoners of war should be kept under the same conditions as men. True, unless they were Jewish or political workers. They should have been executed. It is important to understand that this order appeared too late for most of the military girls. They have long died in Nazi concentration camps and on the battlefield. As the Israeli historian Aaron Schneer tells in the book Captivity, all women arriving at the concentration camp were examined by a gynecologist. German doctors were surprised by the fact that 8 out of 10 unmarried Soviet captives were virgins. For them, it became a sentence. Therefore, more often than others, it was Soviet women prisoners of war who became victims of bullying by the Nazis, and there were quite a lot of them, because more than 1 million Soviet women went through the war. Thus, those who survived on the battlefields, but were captured, had a very bad time. Often, women even envied their dead fighting friends. There are no statistics on how many female prisoners of war were shot and tortured. This is terrible and wrong. All the crimes of the Nazis need to be studied. Of course, those who committed them will not be called to account since they have been dead for a long time, but people should know about it. On this channel, I try to convey to the viewer a more detailed story, which is often forgotten to tell. If you are interested in this video, then please subscribe to my channel and like this video.